Yo, what's good, Knicks Nation? Welcome back to another Game of the Week preview. This time we're previewing round two, the semis of the Eastern Conference between the New York Knicks and the Indiana Pacers. And who better to help preview this game with me is none other than my guy, Alex Golden. You can go find him covering the Pacers over Setting the Pace podcast, all right? And this man's credentialed. He covers the Indiana Pacers. He's there in the pit with all the other beat writers, all right? So make sure to lock in, tap in, hit that thumbs up button for your boys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure to support our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. And let's get it going, all right? And don't forget, Sucker Punch is happening, okay? So if you want to go hang out with the rest of the Orange and Blue Nation while they play tomorrow night at 7:30 p.m. at Madison Square Garden, you can't get in, we're at Sucker Punch. So make sure to lock in for that as well. Alex, this is funny. I get to talk to someone with my same name. This is great. Alex, how you doing?
Hey, you know what? I'm doing good. I think we were blessed with the best name on the podcast. So,
Facts.
Alexander the Great doesn't happen without us. So appreciate you having me on. It's going to be a fun series.
Yeah, man, I'm looking forward to it. And look, I mean, everyone's starting to throw the banners, the graphics of the olden days where you have Reggie, and LJ. You got, I don't want to talk about Roy Hibbert and Melo in that block, and now we got Brunson and Haliburton, which is the two stars of both respective teams. And this should be an interesting one. But I got to ask your opinion first. Look, you guys took care of business. You guys took care of the Milwaukee Bucks. So when you found out that the Knicks won and you knew it was going to be a second round matchup between the Knicks and the Pacers, what were your thoughts?
I thought it was going to be a lot of fun. I know the Pacers, I think they won the series 2-1 in the regular season, but this Knicks team wasn't really healthy during that time either. Never got to see OG Anunoby versus Pascal Siakam when the Pacers got him. I think that's going to be a super fun storyline. Obviously, Tyrese Haliburton has taken this personal because of Wally Zerbiak's comments last year. And then now you have Jalen Brunson, who didn't make Team USA. Tyrese Haliburton did. They were on the same team together last year, as well as Josh Hart. So I think there's a lot of cool storylines here. A lot of people like each other. When I look at New York, I think this is a really fun team. I love that they went for the 2 seed. They didn't fear Philadelphia in the first round as a first round opponent. So I really respect them. I like what Coach Tibbs has done with that team. But I thought to myself, can the Pacers beat this team? Yes, I think they can. But do I think they will? Probably not. So I think we're kind of in that situation here where it's going to be a fun series. I think it may be a little bit closer than maybe the national perspective is in terms of how they're viewing this Pacers team, but I think that it's going to be a good one.
I think it's going to be a good series too. And look, for the first round for the Knicks facing the 76ers, every game was a bloodbath, but the physicality, the limited shot making of both teams just because of how well each team was playing defense. So I was able to take a step back, relax from that. Now I'm wondering, are we going to be able to keep up with this track meet that is the Indiana Pacers, man? I mean, talk about setting the pace. That's a great name for the way that these guys like to play. And with Tyrese Haliburton at the helm, man, these guys like to get out and open.
Well, I think it's interesting because if you look at last round in the first round, the Knicks and the Sixers tied for the slowest pace in the playoffs, where the Pacers were only ninth. The Pacers weren't even in the top 5, top 4 in the last playoff round. So Milwaukee did a really good job in a couple of those games, really dictating the pace, and the Pacers had to play more of a half-court style. So I'm kind of curious, will Indiana be able to play that pace that they want to play, or is because New York is so good at crashing the offensive glass, is it going to keep Indiana more committed to rebounding on the defensive side of things and not getting out and running, which could kind of change the way they play? So I'm curious. I mean, I know the Knicks have done a really good job of hitting that offensive glass hard, especially Josh Hart leading the team in rebounds. Do you think that the way that, they're so relentless at rebounding the basketball, that it's going to keep Indiana from being able to play that fast pace?
I think that's such a loaded question, and I'm glad that you're leading right into the next stuff that I want to get into, which is I want to know some aspects of the matchup that we're looking forward to. So I'm glad that you started with this because this is definitely in my notes where it comes down to rebounding. But for me, it's not just the rebounding, right? Because rebounding is only good as missed shots, and the Pacers are one of the most efficient shooting teams out there. So if they're shooting the ball at a high clip and there's limited rebounds to go around to stay in these matchups, because that's kind of the thing for the Knicks, right? Is that it's missed shots, second chance opportunities. That's where they like to get going. So for me, this is where rubber meets the road. In the first round, I said against Philly, it's based on who's able to control the glass. I still think that is the case in this matchup where if you could control the boards, then you should be able to come away winning this any game, the series, so forth, right? I mean, looking at the last matchup, Knicks could win the rebounding battle by 2. and that it was still the difference maker in winning a game against the Sixers. Now, with a good, efficient shooting team like Indiana, how many opportunities is that going to limit the Pacers from missing some shots? That's my biggest thing, because I'm pretty sure they lead the league in field goal percentage right now, or they led the league in field goal
Yeah.
percentage. So that's where my thought process is, that if the Pacers could continue to play at that high level that Carlisle has them going at, where you guys get multiple shots, you guys like it's quick sets. Like, you're moving the ball around looking for a good three. And if the three's not there, or if someone's just closing out quick, you guys get into the paint and look for the most efficient shot. And with someone like Haliburton, who is the closest thing to the traditional point guard we've seen, like a Chris Paul, you think about Jason Kidd, someone who really looks to get everybody else involved. That's where I'm wondering, is that going to be the offsetting nature of winning the rebounding? Because if you can't stop the Pacers just from getting open looks and knocking down their first attempts, which I know that's hard to say, but still, let's say like they are shooting lights out, which we have seen them, because at one point they had a crazy offensive rating because they were knocking down so many shots at an effective high rate. That's where I'm thinking this may be, you got to limit the Pacers' open looks. And I know for a Tom Thibodeau-led team that likes to play drop coverage, are we going to stop the three-point shooting, which the Pacers would like to take a lot of?
Yeah, Indiana shoots basically layups and threes. There's a random amount of mid-range shots that they'll take, but it's not their MO. They talk about this, they preach this all year long, and it's kind of been their MO going into the season. It's called paint to great, and that's where they want their guys to attack the paint. And if they can score an easy two, obviously take it. But if they can spray it out for threes in the corner, pick and pop with Miles Turner at the top of the key, that's what they want to do. They want to shoot a lot of threes, and they want to shoot a lot at the rim. So it's not like they're really an unpredictable team to guard. They do have this, what they call random offense, where it's just kind of constant moving and trying to find different mismatches to attack. But I feel like with Indiana, they're going to get open looks. It just depends on if their guys are going to make them, because it felt like in the regular season they hit a lot more shots than they did in the playoffs. Tyrese Haliburton shot under 30% from three in the playoffs in the first round. Aaron Nesmith really struggled offensively as well. Turner and Nembhard were probably their two best three-point shooters consistently in the first round, which, Miles Turner makes sense, but Nembhard being that good of a three-point shooter was kind of a bit of a surprise, because he's mostly around an average three-point shooter. So I think with what New York is going to do defensively, it's going to be interesting, because if they do play drop coverage, because they have more of a traditional big, what we saw similarly with the Bucks and Brook Lopez, it allowed Miles Turner to get going in games 3 and games 4, where he had 29 points in back-to-back games. And if you allow Miles Turner to get going and get hot, it can really open up the floor for the rest of the team. We saw Milwaukee try to counter that a little bit by putting Brook Lopez on Pascal Siakam, but in those two games when that happened, Pascal Siakam dropped 36 and 37 points. So it just depends, I think, on how mobile. Obviously, New York's bigs are going to be much more mobile than a Brook Lopez, who's a lot older, slower-footed, that kind of thing. But I think if you can drag away Mitchell Robinson, Isaiah Hartenstein from the basket, could that help? But I also kind of wonder, is there a chance the Knicks maybe go a little bit smaller? I think that could be something to keep an eye on there, depending on what their matchups are. Or could they hide their center potentially on Aaron Nesmith, which is what the Bucks did in Game 6. They put Brook Lopez on Aaron Nesmith because out of the 5 players for the Pacers starting 5, he's probably the worst one offensively in terms of being able to create anything. He's more of a catch and shoot kind of guy, and he's not been shooting the ball particularly well. So if they can maybe hide their center on Nesmith, dare him to shoot a little bit more, and try to slow down that pick and roll, pick and pop game with Haliburton, Turner, Haliburton, Anunoby, I think that could be really interesting. I'm just not sure. I haven't watched a ton of Knicks to prepare for this, which I probably should have, but not really sure how they've gone about their matchups defensively. And I'm curious what you think they might do with guarding this Pacers 5.
See, I think they're going to go traditional in that aspect. I don't really see them going small unless someone's in foul trouble. And that's what we saw against Philadelphia. One of the biggest thing was, oh, well, we didn't have Mitch for game 4. So it was Hartenstein in the third quarter. He got within 10 minutes, 5 fouls. And then you had to put OG on Embiid. And then Precious got in there, and Precious did a solid job. And you saw the rotation between Precious and OG guarding Embiid, mostly OG though. And it worked out to the Knicks' favor. It also helps when your starting point guard drops 47 points on high efficiency and is getting you double-digit assists. So I look at it as, this team is not going to go too far from what they've done all regular season, which is drop coverage. We don't run zone. We don't make it defensively. It's pretty bread and butter, where traditional big. He's going to do drop coverage, right? You're going to get a little bit of a pocket while he's going to be protecting the paint. And then everyone's going to be chasing out on the 3-point line, which is my biggest fear, is that if the Pacers start knocking down threes, are we going to play at the level and then say we're going to reduce the amount of open 3-point looks? But the concern is, and I want to know your thoughts on this, because the Pacers are such a good team when it comes to attacking the paint. They led the regular season in points in the paint, and they're doing it right now in the postseason, leading points in the paint. And I get it, Bucks didn't have Giannis, but that's still something that even when Giannis was on the floor during the regular season, we even saw it during the in-season tournament, they were able to get to their spots and do that. So do you think that's still going to translate against a team with someone like Mitchell Robinson, who is much more versatile than Brook Lopez? Because the thing we all love about Mitch is that he does have that lateral quickness to keep up with somebody running the pick and roll, whether it's a switch, staying with the big. And when it's KP, we see that he has a trouble with someone who is a stretch big and taking him far away and then opening up the paint. But at those times we didn't have OG, so I'm wondering if that's going to be the equalizer and allowing that to happen. But do you think this is a team that you could still get some? Because I think, to answer your question, is do you see the Pacers having I guess the amount of success that they have at attacking the paint against the Knicks, which is what they like to stop and what they're good at, which is stopping points in the paint?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're two totally different teams. Like, what the Knicks are really good at, the Pacers aren't, right? And they kind of are, like, they kind of contrast one another. I think it's what's really makes this series so interesting is, the Knicks give up a lot of open threes. Can the Pacers attack that, right? But getting into the paint is going to be interesting because the Pacers aren't a team that gets a lot of fouls called for them, and especially when they're attacking the basket, because they're not a team that's constantly looking for contact. Where I think New York, Brunson does a really good job of creating contact, getting to the free throw line. Whether you want to call it foul baiting or not, it is a part of his game. It's a good tactic to do. And if you know how to get your body in the right spot, I don't have a problem with it. There's a reason I was actually glad to see New York over Philadelphia, only because I don't want to see Embiid and Lowry flopping all over the place for 7 games if it goes that far. And it's not even like Indiana would have had home court advantage. So, like, it just sounds funny to say that. I just don't want to see that kind of basketball. I just want to see hard-nosed play basketball with little amounts of flopping. And that's one thing the Pacers don't do a whole lot of, is flopping. So they don't always get the calls because they don't really sell it, because it's not just what they do. But I think they're going to be able to attack that. I am kind of curious how Mitchell Robinson's going to be injury-wise with the leg, right? Because Embiid, dirty foul. I don't know how that was just ruled what it was, but should have been probably more than that. And I'm curious how mobile he is, how he's able to play. I think Hartenstein had some really good games against Indiana this season. I thought Precious Achiuwa was fantastic against the Pacers in the game that they played. He was really able to slow down Pascal Siakam in some of those moments. And I know Haliburton, in one of the games in New York, he was still coming back from injury. He wasn't able to play in the second part of the third quarter and then all of the fourth. I think he came out middle of the third and he was done for the night. So it's one of those things where I'm kind of curious how Indiana is able to attack that. I don't really know, but I think that Pascal Siakam has done such a good job in the first round specifically, knowing where to pull up and take those shots and not getting too far down into the paint, where Aaron Nesmith is a guy that's just going to go straight to the basket every time and take some wild shots, where I think he's going to get himself a little bit out of control. But Haliburton wasn't one that was really attacking the paint as much as maybe you'd hope he would. He was shooting a lot of 3-point shots. I still don't think his hamstring 100% healthy. Still trying to find ways to be very effective with that not being 100%. Now, there's been flashes and bursts of him playing really well, but his mid-range jumper was something that he added after the hamstring injury that was really, really good, and he just didn't take a whole lot of those against the Bucks. The Bucks did play a lot more zone against Indiana too, after their man-to-man was getting obliterated. So I think that if New York is pretty disciplined with their man-to-man defense, it's going to make it difficult for Indiana. But I think Haliburton, Siakam, they're just really smart players, and Andrew Nembhard as well. They're going to find ways to attack the basket, regardless of how good New York is at, stopping that. But they're going to find different ways to counter that.
Salute to Knicks Nation. Thank you all for tuning for another Game of the Week preview. With me on the other side is my guy, Alex Golden. You can go find him over at his Pacers podcast, Setting the Pace. Make sure to go subscribe over there if you want to tap in and get the Pacers side of how they're looking at this game. And make sure to hit that thumbs up button for your boys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure to support our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match. Okay, so Alex, you brought up something very interesting, which I wanted to highlight too, because this is another thing I'm looking at in this matchup, is that both these teams made a deal with the Raptors. They both
Yeah.
got somebody that look. We knew that Indiana wanted to get both OG and Siakam. We heard about those rumors. Knicks wanted OG since last season, and they finally got him. But this is where I'm interested in the change because they both played like they're both on the same team in Toronto, as well as Precious Achua. So I'm wondering how much of that is going to be a factor in this series because OG knows what Siakam likes to do and vice versa. So
Hmm.
what do you make of now both these guys on the team, both of them healthy going into the series? How much of that do you think will impact this game?
Well, I definitely think it's going to play a huge factor. Now, my biggest question for you, because I'm curious, will OG Anunoby guard Pascal Siakam, or will Tom Thibodeau put him on Tyrese Haliburton?
I think he's going to go with. See, that's so tough, man. Because I'm
You,
like if I'm going through the Pacers lineup, I could see why you'd want him on OG, and then it's like I'd have to look at I don't have to look at the step chart now. And I got to pull up the Indiana Pacers depth chart and see like who is guarding who.
yeah, I mean,
Because
if I'm guessing here, right, I'm just going to play it off a little bit. Whoever's starting at center is going to guard Turner. I
yep,
think
that's a given.
I think DiVincenzo, you probably try to hide him on one of Neesmith or Nimhard.
Yep.
And then I think Brunson. I think Brunson, you probably try to hide on Nimhard. DiVincenzo, you put on Neesmith. And then my guess is Josh Hart will either guard Halliburton or Siakam, but I can see him guarding Siakam as well. I just think that if you put OG on Tyrese, the one thing I find very interesting with that is that's what Toronto did earlier this year when he was still with the Raptors. And Tyrese struggles when he has bigger defenders on him, like a Jalen McDaniels, things like that, because he's used to guys being at the same, size as him or smaller because he's a 6'5" point guard. When you put a bigger defensive guy like that, it's harder to get around. So I could see them saying, you know what, the head of the snake is Tyrese Haliburton for this offense and their engine. Let's try to cut that off as quick as we can and make other people beat us. And that's where I could see OG being that X factor. And I'm not saying Josh Hart couldn't hang with him, but I just don't. I kind of think that Josh Hart might be able to hang with Siakam a little bit easier just because Siakam isn't going to do too much crazy stuff. Like he might jab and hit a turnaround jumper, but or a corner three if he's setting up, but he's not someone that's just going to be putting you in the blender and trying to create all this offense. He's just a scorer. That's really what he does offensively.
I could see Siakam getting the Josh Hart assignment and OG on Halliburton. Halliburton's very quick, and with OG on Maxi in round one, we kind of saw that as not the Achilles heel to OG,
Mhm.
but it took away from the paint presence that you needed OG for. And then you saw the switch with Dante and McBride on Maxi, and then you had OG guarding who was it? It was guarding Tobias Harris in the paint, so that
Mhm.
way he could shade over and guard Joel Embiid. Now, I think the thing is that does Tibbs see that necessary to work with Miles Turner? Do you want him as a free safety in there to just kind of guard the paint if Halliburton's getting a full head of steam downhill? I think it'll switch back and forth. I think he'll try OG in the paint and see how much Josh Hart can start off with on Halliburton. I think that's the direction to go with because
Mhm.
Siakam is not somebody that you necessarily would just want to let get going either. Because if he's going, then it's just going to open everything else up. So, and I think height is a big thing in Tom Thibodeau's game planning. He doesn't want to give too much height. And Josh Hart still being a 6'4" guard, we know you can rebound the hell out of the ball,
Yeah.
but I don't think you want to give up that much of a height difference for somebody
Mhm.
that could shoot over Josh Hart as well, because then it may put Josh Hart into this predicament where, get a little bit more physical, maybe lead to some foul trouble. I think Tibbs would be worried about that. And so maybe
Mhm.
that's why you give him the Haliburton assignment. And so I think playing at point of attack defense, it's a little bit easier to be more physical than it is down low because you got the ref right by the baseline. They can see what's going on. I think it's a little bit more difficult to see. All right, someone's getting ahead of steam. Is there who initiated contact? How much contact is there? So maybe you go with the Josh Hart first on Haliburton, then OG on Siakam. And if things start to go haywire, I could see that switch. I don't think anything's going to stick unless it's like foolproof and everything's working through. But I think
Mhm.
that's the way to go. And I probably put Brunson on. I'm probably thinking Naismith,
Yeah, it
honestly,
makes sense. It makes sense
because
because
like he's on the bottom totem pole when it comes to scoring wise.
yeah, I mean, I think Nimhard has been really good in this last series against the Bucks. Very consistent. Didn't score a lot of points, but he knows when to attack at the right time. and his 3-point shot has gotten much better as the season has prolonged, and he's become that starting two guard next to Haliburton officially, like for the past couple of months since they made the trades with Buddy Hield and Bruce Brown obviously going to Toronto, and then with Benedict Mathurin being injured and not being able to play, that has kind of been where the Pacers have had to go because they're just kind of thin a little bit at that guard position now, and that was one of their biggest strengths. So I just think Nembhard has such a calm poise to him as well. His ability to hit that, he's really keen on hitting that about 12 to 15-foot jump shot off the dribble, and he hits a lot of them. And I think he doesn't take a lot, but when he does shoot them, it usually goes in. So he's going to be ready for the moment. I think that a lot of people in New York are going to end up hating Andrew Nembhard because that's how it was early on with Milwaukee. He's not really afraid of anything. He's in year two. It's just kind of like all new and exciting for him. And he's not really having a coming out party, but a little bit of a coming out party to kind of let people realize, he is a capable two-way player. I wouldn't say he's anything like great, but he's a very solid two-way player that can kind of be that X factor a little bit for Indiana if he's hitting his shots.
Okay, for sure. But Alex, we can't bury the lead too much longer. We all know what the real show of this matchup is, and that's my key matchup of today or this series: Jalen Brunson versus Tyrese Haliburton. This is going to be the one that's going to be the headlines. Everyone's going to talk about it. They want to see how both these guys compete. They were both, as you noted earlier in the show, they were both on Team USA for FIBA World Cup. So how will these guys match up from a scoring perspective and leading their team perspective? Because I don't see these guys necessarily guarding each other too much, but this is where the matchup is going to be made because Haliburton, and these are two different style point guards. Like I said, Haliburton, just like your traditional point guard, looks to set everybody else up, then starts to get rolling for himself. Brunson likes to get rolling for himself first and then get everyone else involved because, let's keep it a buck, he's our best triple threat, scoring at all three levels. Once he draws the defense, then he can start finding anybody else who's open. And these guys have been having one hell of a season and one hell of a playoff so far. What do you think of this matchup going into it?
I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think both guys are going to be really intrigued by going at one another. I think they respect each other, good friends off the court, but I think in this series it's going to be a little personal. And I think Jalen Brunson probably feels it more than Tyrese because earlier in the beginning of the season, Tyrese was getting crowned as top 5 player in the NBA. I think he played at that level with the Pacers in-season tournament run of the championship game. Like he was up there. He was hitting a lot of shots. He was averaging a lot of close to 20 assist games with 0 turnovers at certain points in the year. Like he was just playing at a phenomenal level. But if you look at the numbers from both teams in the series, I mean, Josh Hart had more points per game than Tyrese Haliburton did against the Bucks. So it's just one of those things where Tyrese, his shooting has not been the same, his scoring has not been the same since Siakam got there. And I'm not saying it's a Siakam problem. I'm just saying I think it's an injury problem. The Jalen Brunson thing is very interesting to me because I think Jalen Brunson is going to score his points. I don't think there's anybody on Indiana that can really slow him down. I think Andrew Nembhard will probably get the first, crack at him. But even in the regular season, Nembhard struggled mightily with trying to stop Jalen Brunson and his physicality and just the way that he knows how to score on different types of players. I think Aaron Nesmith is maybe a little bit more of a physical defender and adds a little bit more size. So I kind of wonder if maybe they'll take turns guarding him and see which one is a little bit better for them overall. But we'll see. I felt like in the last series, Nesmith really got worked by Chris Middleton. Chris Middleton was able to use his size advantage over Nesmith. And with him being so physical, Chris Middleton could kind of, predict where he was going to be at. When they had Nembhard a little bit smaller of a guy on Middleton, it actually worked in the Pacers' favor more. I thought Nembhard did a better job defensively on Middleton while he was also taking turns guarding Damian Lillard. So to me, I think that this is going to be an interesting one for sure. Haliburton, like you said, he's more of a traditional point guard. It's scoring is not his first thing. It's passing, and he wants to get everybody else involved. He came out really strong in Game 6 against the Bucks, looking for his shot. He had 15 points in the first half, and that was something we really haven't seen him do a lot. But he finished the game with 17. So it's one of those things where he has to try to find that right balance where Jalen is just constantly putting pressure on the opponent's defense with what he can do offensively. So I guess for me, I know this is like the big headliner, like Tyrese versus Jalen, but if Indiana is able to kind of slow down Jalen a little bit, maybe do some double teaming, kick the ball out of his hands, do the Knicks, in your opinion, have enough scoring wise outside of Jalen Brunson to get where they need to get to point wise to win, multiple games if he's not putting 35 points up a game.
Alex, you were teeing me up for my X factor, so thank you. And I do believe they have enough scoring, and this is who's my X factor, who I think will help in this series, even though he was kind of a no-show to a certain degree in the last one. It is none other than Dante DiVincenzo.
Yeah.
Okay, because this is the guy who actually has shown up and showed out against Indiana, and I think this is the time where you start to see that tide turn, where Dante is struggling to find his three-point shot against a physical and good defensive 76ers team, where you saw Nick Nurse made sure that he had little to no airspace to get some threes off. Now, Dante did have that big shot in game 2, and he did come alive in game 6, which was much needed for the Knicks to secure that win and get into the second round. But I do think that the Knicks do have enough offensively. Dante being that second leading scorer, I think he'll be that guy that we're used to seeing throughout the regular season in this matchup. As you pointed out, Indiana, they're probably going to try doubling and doing all that nature. Indiana not known as a great defensive team, as I'm sure you're well aware of. And that's why I think for them, I think they're going to try everything to do just to make sure Brunson doesn't get his, which is going to open up for guys like Dante. I think we'll see some solid Josh Hart games like we did before. McBride has really come into his own. But yeah, I think Dante is going to show up in this one and shoulder more of the load that he wasn't able to do in the first round. I think he's going to do that in the second one. What do you think about Dante, though, as like a guy who could potentially be that offensive hub? If Brunson is going to get double teamed and he's looking for someone for some help?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good call by you, because I think in the first game the Pacers played against the Knicks earlier this season, is back when the Knicks actually made the OG trade. It was the exact same day. Dante, I think, had 36 points on the road in Indianapolis and was just torching Indiana. And Carlisle, even though the Pacers won that game, he was just hot. He was like, our defense sucked that game. I don't care that we won this one. It was not a good showing by us, and we got lucky basically that we won that game. And then I think DiVincenzo had another big scoring output against Indiana when they ended up winning that game. I think it's a game Haliburton set out. Him and Haliburton were trash talking a lot as they were guarding one another. And I know DiVincenzo was going to the Pacers bench and talking to Ty as he's sitting there not being able to play because he's on a minutes restriction. So I would assume that those two are going to guard each other some a little bit. I especially expect Tyrese to be guarding DiVincenzo on the other side of the court. It just makes the most sense in terms of who the Knicks will put out there for their starting five. But I will say this, Tyrese Haliburton's defense in the postseason has gotten a lot better. The effort has been there tremendously more than it had been in the regular season. And a lot of people will always go to the Pacers defense as being a really bad defense. And, oh, they suck this, that, and that. I will just say this, the last 2 months probably of the regular season and in the postseason against Milwaukee, their defense did improve. Now, it's not perfect, and it's still far away from what the Knicks defense is. I'm not saying that, but it's much more around the average defense in the league than it is the bottom three, like it was for what the season numbers will tell you, because their defense did improve quite a bit by, you take away a Buddy Hield out of that lineup, you put Andrew Nembhard in there instead, Aaron Nesmith in there instead of Benedict Mather, and they just became a much more collected defensive unit. And you add Siakam, who can actually give them some size at the power forward spot when they didn't have that. I mean, Obi Toppin is not known for his defense whatsoever, and he's taken strides defensively, but he's still not a great defensive player. But Ben Shepherd off the bench for the Pacers has provided good wing defense for a rookie, 4-year player out of Belmont. And then TJ McConnell is scrappy as all.
Oh my God, that's the last guy I want to talk about. All right,
yes,
because that guy is always, that's a Nick killer right there, and
he's a killer for every team. Yeah. But in a series, I think he's a little bit easier to guard. You know why? Because you know what he's going to do. He's very predictable, and I'll just say this: the first 5 games against the Bucks, he was like the second worst in net rating for the Pacers, because Milwaukee was able to really keen in on him and figure out what he does so well. You could just take it away because he doesn't really have a 3-point shot, and he likes to get in the paint and shoot little floaters, fading away off 1 foot. But if you put a bigger defender on him, he can't get that shot over him as well. So I think that in a matchup against New York, I mean, they're going to be able to find ways to really eliminate him and not have him be as productive as he might be in the regular season, because he's a torture for a lot of different teams in the regular season. But he had a great home game in Game 6. Him and Obi Toppin really helped close that one out for Indiana against Milwaukee. They led the team in scoring, both had over 20 points off the bench. So, I mean, he's capable of doing that, but it wasn't like it was just constantly TJ McConnell just leading the Pacers bench unit as it had been. The starters for Indiana against Milwaukee were really putting up some positive numbers, and the Damian Lillard minutes, they absolutely destroyed the Bucks when Lillard was on the court. So I think that it's kind of interesting how all that played out. But, McConnell, everybody always says, oh, he's such a killer of this team, a killer of that team, because he does do that in the regular season. But I think he's a little bit more predictable in the postseason.
Salute to Knicks Nation. Thank you all for tuning in for another Game of the Week preview. With me on the other side is my guy, Alex Golden. He covers the Indiana Pacers, and he has the podcast Setting the Pace. Make sure to tap in if you want to hear how the Pacers' perspective on the series against the New York Knicks. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button for your boys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure to support our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match. And let me talk to you about Underdog Fantasy for a bit. Look, everyone, I love the app. It's a lot of fun. When I'm watching a game, I want to put a little money down the line because you know what? I watch enough basketball. I'm like, wait a minute. I think I should know what the outcomes are going to be, right? So all you got to do is, if you want to do the pick'ems, choose 2 to 5 players, and you choose higher or lower on any statistical category that you think the player is going to do better or worse on. So, for example, points, rebounds, and assists. You can choose higher or lower than that. They can even have a combination of all 3 of those stats together, especially if you want to follow someone like Jokic, which, wow, tough game yesterday for them against the Minnesota Timberwolves. The other thing that Underdog has, drafts. So if you don't want to do that, you could do a draft with some of your friends, CP, CK, and JD and myself. We all like to do that, put a little lunch money on the table, and whoever wins, lunch on them, lunch on the rest of the team for the next day. So make sure to support our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. All right. Now, Alex, I need to know who your X factor is in this series. For me, as I said, it's Dante. Who is it for Indy right now? Because I know you guys are missing Mathurin. He's probably the guy that you would have gone to as your X factor in this. But who is it now?
Yeah, I kind of hinted at it earlier, and I think it's Andrew Nembhard. I really do. I know that everyone is probably a lot of people want to pick Nesmith as the X factor every time you talk about the Pacers. Even Pacers people really think, oh, Nesmith could really get going. But I just think Andrew Nembhard is going to be the difference maker for Indiana if he plays even at a higher level than he played last series, just because of his defensive ability. Is he able to slow down Brunson just one-on-one? Him and Brunson and Dame are such different players, where Dame is more kind of a finesse type of guy, where Brunson's more physical, going to get into the paint. Can Nembhard stay out of foul trouble? Because if he doesn't, then that's going to be really problematic for Indiana, trying to find different ways to slow him down. So I think that Nembhard is really the X factor. And can he continue to be offensively as well as he has been? Can he shoot the ball as well as he has? Can he be that secondary playmaker if a lot of attention goes to Tyrese Haliburton with the ball in his hands? Because I can see New York really trying to make Tyrese Haliburton pass the ball up, put the ball in Nembhard's hand to kind of initiate the offense a little bit more. And we've seen him do it at times, but there's also times where he can have a lot of high turnovers. But I think if he can just stay poised and get this offense rolling and make the right passes, that's, to me, what's going to be the X factor. So I think moving forward for any series, I think Nembhard really is just the X factor for Indiana and whatever they want to do because of his ability. You kind of know what to expect with Tyrese, Siakam, Turner. Those are the Pacers' big 3. But for someone that I think could really impact the series a lot, I would say Nembhard. And I think the other one that I think is a little bit of a secondary X factor is Obi Toppin. I really do think Obi Toppin could be interesting. How can he affect the glass? Is he going to be more? Because when they've asked him to be more of a rebounder instead of someone that leaks out for fast break, transition buckets, he's been able to do it. It's just his sample size has been a little bit up and down this year. Since they got Pascal Siakam, he's gone back to the bench as a backup 4 playing behind Siakam. But the Pacers really didn't trust their centers in that first round matchup behind Miles Turner. And so we saw Obi Toppin play a lot of backup 5. And I'm kind of curious, will that be the case with how good the Knicks are on the glass, or will they go back to Jalen Smith or Isaiah Jackson to be their backup 5 and maybe play a 9-man rotation? I don't know. But if they play an 8-man rotation, can Obi Toppin and Pascal Siakam together, be able to handle the Knicks on the glass as the 4 and the 5 if for some reason Turner's in foul trouble? So I just think Obi Toppin, a homecoming right here, obviously had the comments last year in the locker room that got him, pretty much booted out of New York for not very much. How personal is this for him, right? I mean, there's a lot of different storylines to look at here, but how did the Knicks fans feel about Obi Toppin? Is it a love-hate relationship?
I think there is definitely. So I guess to set this all up, Alex, that you're asking me about, for at the time when Obi was here, I was, part of the Obi hive. I had to defend him on KFTV because he was considered a dud pick. Dud pick by somebody who is producing the show who doesn't want to talk right now, but it's okay, CP. We won't talk about that. Look, man, Good for him being in a situation that's better for him. It's a pace that he obviously plays at. I think him and Haliburton are a good fit. If you ask Knicks Nation how they felt, some would say, hey, get him out of here. He doesn't fit what we do because we need defense, which is what Precious has provided. Others would say, hey, his skill set wasn't utilized because what he can offer, he's more than just a 3-point shooter, which he kind of like he was situated into his last year here, where you saw in his second season, he was getting out in transition, doing a little bit more of that. But that was also because he had a guard, someone in Derrick Rose that was looking for him and looking to set him up, which is what you get in Tyrese Haliburton, a guy who's looking to constantly set his players up. So it just wasn't a good fit here. Obviously, wish him well. I think it's been a better situation for him out in Indiana.
Yeah.
I think you'd be better than me. You've been watching Indiana this entire season, so I would say the biggest thing for Obi was definitely his defense, and some would say his lack of offense. Do you think those still remain true today, or do you think he's improved in some areas where he could
I,
be a solid role player in the league?
yeah, I would say that he's improved for sure. I mean, it's still, something he needs to work on, right? The defense specifically, like he's so back and forth with his defense. Like you'll see shades of really good defense. Like the game that always sticks out to everybody was when he had to guard Jimmy Butler in Miami. And he did a very good job on Jimmy Butler, which was a little bit surprising. I didn't expect him to be kind of the Pacers, de facto defender on him, kind of trying to make things hard for Jimmy Butler, but he actually did with his size and his quickness. But he does kind of move a little different. I know he's fast, but it's not like I feel like he moves unnaturally at times. So it's interesting. But for this season, he shot 40% from three, which is great to see. And in the postseason, I think he shot around like 30% against the Bucks. So it was a pretty big drop off there, but he was much better at home than he was on the road. And one thing that he did really well was he would get in there in like the 6 minute mark to play more with Tyrese. And it was by design in terms of like rotations for the Pacers. They were trying to get him in there with Tyrese more than playing him with McConnell off the bench. And he would go out there and score like 9 points in the first quarter and give Indiana a little burst of scoring that they needed if they didn't get it from their starters. And then they'd bring Siakam back in a little bit later in the first, play with him a little bit at the 4 and the 5. But I just feel like his ability to come in right away, and he was really impactful at home more than he was on the road. I'm kind of curious how that road environment is going to be for him because New York is, like I talked about on the podcast week that I said, if anybody thinks that the Milwaukee Buck fans are bad, you haven't met how rowdy the New York fans are.
I'm about
I'm
to
not
say we're
saying they're
not bad,
bad.
but we are loud and we are
You're
proud for
loud,
our
you're
team.
passionate, you're
Yeah.
rowdy. You're a passionate fan base. Nobody's saying anything about that because the Pacers had more like Bobby sucks chants. Like, Bucks fans weren't chanting that. They were chanting Bucks in 7. Like that was their like, ooh, yeah, we're coming at you. You guys have the F Trae Young chant. You know what I mean? So it's like there's a much more rowdy crowd in New York, and their fan base is much more passionate than Milwaukee. If you think that what the Bucks fans were saying to, Pacers players were bad, like just wait till it's in New York. It's going to be different. I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It's a much more intense environment. And I think Madison Square Garden is known as the greatest arena in the world, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's a great place to put on a show. It's a great place to go make a name for yourself. So it's a great opportunity, but it's also a very hard thing to accomplish because the Knicks have been awesome there. But you saw Tyrese Maxey get 7 points in less than like what was it, 20 seconds or whatever it was.
Hey
So
man, I don't want to live in the past at this point. All right, we close that series out. It's done. But I
I'm
get what
just
you're saying.
saying
Look, I get what you're saying. And look, playing at Madison Square Garden, it is the world's most famous arena, as we hear on the broadcast. And I believe that to be true because every time somebody comes walking through, especially when the Knicks weren't good, someone be putting up some numbers, historic numbers like a Zeke Naji, and you're like, what is happening here? You have Ricky Rubio deciding to be a 3-point specialist. I'm like, where did this come from? And so,
Right.
yes, this is everyone likes to perform at Madison Square Garden.
Yes.
I will say this: it is going to be rowdy. It is going to be loud. Everyone's going to be in there for Game 1. It is going to be reminiscent of the '90s. It's going to be reminiscent of when it was Melo and those Indiana Pacers, right? With Paul George and everybody. So there is some tension. There is some bad blood in there. And so I know Knicks Nation is going to show up right and correct when it comes to seeing Indiana on that floor. And we're going to see red, man. We're going to see red that day. There's going to be some blood. That's how we're going to feel that day. And it's not because we necessarily hate everybody from Indiana, but we are a passionate fan base, as you noted, and we love our team and we want to see them win. And we just don't like the Indiana Pacers from the history that we already get that. So it is what it is at this point. But for Obi, will he come home when we get cheers? I don't think he's going to get cheers. I think maybe a
No.
little bit. Maybe there'll be a little standing ovation for him. Maybe just because of the impact that he had on this team, and they did make the playoffs last year. Maybe he might get that. But after that,
No,
it's all fair game at that point. Okay,
for sure.
that's how I think it's going to happen. But shout out to my guy, my 2 cents. He did send out a super chat, and shout out to hold on one second. Let me just make sure I get your name right. Shout out to my guy Will Santiago for being a franchise channel member. Shout out to my guy, my 2 cents, who's also a franchise channel member, and for the $5 super chat. You're always in here, and he's asked Alex thoughts on Rick Carl Brunson rematch. He sat JB in 21 for all but 10 off the bench in game 7. Mm.
Yeah, I saw
I
that.
think there is some blood in there. I think there is going to be some, let me show you who I am now when you didn't believe in me back in Dallas.
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit. I wonder how much time has passed to kind of heal that wound. I mean, it's been how many years ago? 4 or 5 years since that moment. So I'm sure there's a little bit of that in the back of Brunson's mind, but I think more so he just wants to win the series. That's more narrative stuff for us to talk about here for media purposes and things like that. I will say this: Carlisle is never going to bash anybody. Carlisle is, so good about praising his opponent. Like he couldn't stop gawking about how great Chris Middleton was in the last round. And he's already been doing that about Jalen Brunson. And people I've been seeing in the comment sections on social media when they see Carlisle's quotes are saying, it's too late now. You can't take back what you did. It's funny. But I think that, Jalen Brunson at that point and that point of his career, he wasn't who he is now today. So, to me, yeah, it seemed like a lot of the defensive blame got put on Brunson when maybe it was more Luka Doncic's fault. But you can kind of
Mm.
see Luka Doncic and Rick Carlisle didn't have a great relationship either. And Rick Carlisle has said that he kind of had to change some things. And when Tyrese Haliburton was traded here, he shifted his philosophy and said, "Okay, Tyrese, I'm going to let you make the calls. I'm not going to call everything offensively. I might call something, but Tyrese kind of has that power to veto what Carlisle says and run his own thing. So they've kind of worked that out. And I think Carlisle has learned from how aggressive he was, maybe of handling the offense, like dictating everything. He's come back on that a little bit. But you know what? I think Brunson is still going to remember it, sure, and I'm sure that he's going to play great. But I think whether it was Rick Carlisle coaching the Pacers or whether it was Nate McMillan or Frank Vogel, I still think Jalen Brunson would be as ruthless as he has been all season. Doesn't matter the coach. I think that's just a side narrative about it. I just think Jalen Brunson wants to win and prove to everybody how great he is, not just Rick Carlisle.
That's for sure. And I think, that's another aspect of this game that I'm looking forward to is you talk about Rick Carl adapting, for Indiana and their new look roster, the pace that Haliburton plays at. This is going to be a fascinating matchup between Tom Thibodeau and Rick Carlisle, in my
Yeah.
opinion, because both these coaches have had to change their identity to a bit. Um, as you mentioned, for Rick Carlisle, like I said, offensively, changing how he operates a team with Haliburton at the helm. For Tibbs, watching how he has had to coach this team, especially being decimated with injuries, not having Julius, not having Mitch for 50 games, OG missing part of the season after the trade. He's really made this team much more dynamic offensively, which I didn't think would be the words coming out of my mouth. You always think defense for Tom Thibodeau, and the biggest adjustment he's made is offensively, making sure that there's more movement, more guys are cutting, more guys are moving off ball, looking for better 3-point shots, making sure you get into the paint more efficiently. Obviously, Jalen Brunson will move at his own pace and set up for everybody else, but the way that he has, just guided his team to orchestrate differently without having their second all-star, their second all-NBA player in Julius Randle has really been something of a pleasant surprise to watch this season, and has really, kudos to Tom Thibodeau for what he has had to do this season, what he's had to deal with to get this team to 50 wins. So I'm looking forward to seeing how this chess match between him and Carl are going to, unfold, because well, Carlisle is an NBA champion. Okay, he won one with the Mavericks, so you
Mhm.
just don't lose that just because you're on a different team. Sure, maybe the way that you thought it was going to pan out in Dallas, it didn't, and you had to change in Indiana, but there's still, we're talking about two good coaches right here who are going to be, you know, playing some solid chess.
No, there's no doubt about it. And Rick Carlisle finally, with the Pacers beating the Bucks, got his first first round playoff series wins since the championship run in 2011. So, Rick Carlisle has had a lot of, first round exits, and now they just kind of got that monkey off of his back. It'll be interesting. I think that Tom Thibodeau, he's had a lot to deal with. Like you said, navigating all the injuries they've had all season long with Julius, with OG, with Mitch Rob. I mean, he's had to do a lot, and he's got a lot out of his players. Like the Hartenstein pickup for New York, I think might have been one of the best pickups all offseason last year. What he's been able to provide, like he's a starting level center that's really your backup when fully healthy. So, I mean, that's a great piece that they have right there. And Tibbs has just been able to find ways to win basketball games, even when maybe their backs were against the wall or they didn't look like they would be that team to do it. But one of the questions I was going to ask you that I forgot to ask earlier when we were talking about the pace was if Indiana is able to play their pace and play so fast and not play at a slow tempo like New York would prefer, is that going to hurt New York's depth in terms of how many minutes they want to play these guys? Because if you see Josh Hart playing 46 minutes, DiVincenzo 46, Jalen maybe plays all 48, whatever, are they going to be able to play those lengthy of minutes if Indiana's constantly making them play fast? And one thing Indiana did too, they played full court press against Milwaukee for a majority of the series, and they were trying to really just tire them out. And you saw the Bucks kind of do that. They're a little bit older than New York for sure, so I think that's an advantage for New York. But Indiana's used to playing this fast of a pace. They've been playing it all year long. If they can kind of play their tempo, is that going to impact the number of minutes that New York can actually really play their guys and get the same level of high IQ basketball?
I really think you got my cheat sheet over here, Alex, because you're really leading me into like these next topic questions that I have. But yes, the bench is going to be very much a thing that we have to focus in on. I think not just for the Knicks. I think it also goes to the Pacers too. You talk about Obi Toppin being that spark off the bench. Well, he's not a guy who creates for himself. He needs somebody to get him going. McConnell, as you said, even though I note that he could be a pain in the butt for the Knicks, he's still not a guy that you're looking towards for offense. And, without Mathurin, who I would say is probably who is worthy of that 6-man role and being that creator, I think both these teams are in the situation where your stars are going to be playing a lot of minutes.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
if it comes down to the point where, hey, it is a track meet and there's going to be some difficulty stopping, like the Knicks are going to bring out Deuce McBride, and he's going to be the first guy off the bench probably next to Mitchell Robinson to try to slow things down. I'm wondering if Precious Achiuwa makes an appearance in this one, maybe even one Alec Burks, because look, this is CP and I had a whole discussion about Alec Burks once the trade. The guy did absolutely bare minimum, if not nothing, for this team since he got here. But there was one thing that he did do well. He did actually score efficiently in I think the last game against the Indiana Pacers. He did get 20 off the bench. So maybe if you're Tom Thibodeau, you look at that as a sample size in this series. You say, we don't have Bogdanovich. We're breaking the glass. We're opening up the trunk, as the people will say, because look, we had a caller call in one day. They said, put him in the trunk. They're like, put Alec Burks in the trunk, throw away the key. Put him in the river, essentially. We're like, whoa, that's a little aggressive. All right. We just don't want him to play. We don't need to put him in the trunk, but maybe he's getting out of the trunk for this series. And hopefully if he does, he can provide some solid offense. And that would be a way to get some, get things going for that unit, because in as much as he has been efficient since he's joined, there may be that hope that he could find that magic that he did on his first season with the Knicks as that guy coming off the bench and being that isolation scorer. But who knows? This is a guy who's been bricking it up, who's been put in the trunk, and Tibbs heard that call and did the right thing and didn't play him for the rest of the season. So if it were to get to that point where you're saying, hey, the starters need a break, we need to incorporate something more here, it might be Precious, just from a big standpoint. It could be Alec Burks, but I think this team could potentially run 7 deep again, which they did in the first round. And we're just going to see Mitch and Deuce coming off the bench, which would be tough, but I think that's also a realistic option for this team.
Yeah, I mean, 7 players deep for a playoff series is not a lot of depth on your rotation. I do think Precious does make some sense for this matchup because of how effective he was against Indiana, specifically Pascal Siakam. I think that he knows his tendencies as well. And he gave Pascal a lot of fits in that first game, I think, that he played against him. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But, I mean, I would not be surprised if Precious Achiuwa does get some run here And the Pacers bench, you talk about their inability to really create for themselves. It is TJ McConnell doing most of the creating for that second unit. And one thing that I have really not been a fan of with what Carlisle has done in moments was he's run lineups where it's been really bench heavy, and sometimes he's gone to 4 bench players in the postseason with just one starter out there, and it might have been Neesmith or Nimhard. It just you can't. They don't have enough offensive creation to really run those lineups too often. A lot of fans have been asking, please, you got to keep Siakam and/or Haliburton out there at all times. But even the Siakam minutes with the bench at times was not great, and they didn't do a good job of running the offense through him. It was how can we run the offense through McConnell? And to me, that's just not a recipe for success if you're trying to win in the postseason. I mean, McConnell can do some stuff every once in a while, but relying on him to do so much offensively for your bench unit, to me, that's not the greatest way to win a basketball game. I'd rather see them move the ball around. And that's the thing. The Pacers really don't have like that Jalen Brunson type of guy that's going to drop 36 a night. Pascal Siakam led them in scoring with like 22 points a game, but in the first 2 games, he had 36 and 37. And so everything else from that, like his field goal attempts continue to go down game after game after game because the Bucks figured out how to kind of slow him down. And I'm kind of curious too, because when I look at this Pacers team, they are best when they have 5 to 6 guys in double digit scoring, when they are closer to 30, 35 assists a game on 46 made shots, right? That's kind of their MO. It's like we move the basketball, we get open looks, we knock down our shots, we're going to win games. If we try to play isolation ball, we try to play one-on-one basketball, we're just not usually going to win those type of, styles. That's just not their style to win. So Rick Carlisle said we are a true team and we win as a team. Nobody on this team really is going to take over a game. Like, you don't have a Reggie Miller who's probably going to drop, 40 points in a game against the Knicks or 25 in the fourth quarter. Like, that's just not who they've been all year. Could it happen in a moment? Sure. Could Tyrese get hot in a moment? Sure. We've seen that happen, but it's not really been their calling card. So I'm kind of curious because that was one of my big questions for you too, is you talked about it earlier with who can fill in for Brunson if he doesn't, but more so the question of, is it better to is it easier to know like you're going to get guaranteed points from your star and then whoever fills in for that game, it's like, yeah, that's cool. Or is it, one of those things where you know the Pacers don't have like just this one dominant scorer, but they have different ways to beat you. Which one's harder to guard? Which one's harder to prepare for? It kind of feels like maybe it'd be harder to prepare for a team that doesn't have that go-to guy that's going to dictate everything like Indiana does. But at the same time, you're not getting that guaranteed, 30 plus points a game from a star. It's not as reliable because you just never know who's going to show up and be that guy.
I think it's harder to guard somebody who is a superstar like
Mm,
Brunson because they can go out there and drop 25 easy in their sleep, right?
yeah.
That's harder to guard, in my opinion. And since Brunson's been averaging, I mean, he had over 40 points in the last 3 games, right? Against the Sixers, that's tough to stop. I mean, I could say just watch from an Embiid and Maxey standpoint. You hope that they're off because that is tough to stop because if they're going, that's who's going to be leading the way for the team. Guessing on who is going to get hot from a role player perspective, to me, that's easier to guard because you don't even know if they're going to be hot for the rest of the night. It could be a
Mm,
quarter, it could be a half. They come out in the second half and not have it going. I mean, I can look back at, when the Knicks had Austin Rivers. He was hot in the first half, didn't miss a shot, and got, I think, 24, 25 points against the Utah Jazz. Comes out in the second half after Tiz pulled him in the first, man was ice cold. So for role players, to me, it's easier. That's easier to defend because there's a reason why they're role players. They're not consistent. They
mm,
also don't really travel well when they're not in their own arena, right? They
that's true.
perform better in their arena, not on the road for the most part. And so that's why I think for a star, stars got to do what they do, which is show up anywhere where it is and drop the points and get their team going. So because the Pacers play a more team atmosphere, the star is still Haliburton.
Yeah.
And even though he's not the score per se as what Brunson is, the thing that worries about me is him getting guys involved because he's going to still draw enough attention where you're worried that you don't want him to get going and then he finds somebody else. And then Siakam would be the second guy that I worry about because proven what he did in Toronto, also an NBA champion. That's a guy I'm like, you don't want to get those two feeling it. So I think from that standpoint, stopping the stars is I'd rather stop the role players than have a true scoring star that's going to be a danger every single night. That's how I look at it as.
Yeah.
But Alex, but just before we let you go, I want to like, let's put a bow on the show and wrap it up here. What do you think? How do you think the series is going to unfold? Do you think it's, like, do you think it's going to be a tightly contested every single night? Do you think there's going to be some games that just get out of hand? What do you think? How do you think the series goes?
Yeah, I mean the Pacers last series proved, hey, they've not responded, well to winning, and sometimes they get a little bit overconfident. So if they win a game or two in a row, could the Knicks come out and punch them in the mouth and win by 25 points, 30 points? I think it's very possible. So I think this is going to be one of those series where you're going to have a few close games. I don't think every game is going to be down to the wire. I think there's going to be nights when New York is just able to really lock in defensively, make things hard for Indiana, and they're going to get going. They're going to get hot. They're going to have big nights. But I think there's going to be a game or two maybe in this series where Indiana just hits everything from three, and they can run New York out of the gym offensively. So to me, I think this goes 7 games. I think New York wins in 7 on their home court. I think a lot of people have been writing the Pacers off before the series even started. They didn't really want to give Indiana credit for beating Milwaukee because they didn't have Giannis. But I still think they had, some very talented players and Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis. Like they still have a very good team. I know it's not the same without Giannis, but Indiana's still young, trying to figure out how to win. And I think New York is kind of in that same realm right there. Like they've never, like this group together has not won anything significantly. So they're still trying to figure each other out too. So I think it goes 7 games. I'm going to pick the Knicks in 7. I think it's going to be tightly contested, back and forth. And I think both teams will get wins on the other opponent's territory at some point. I just see it going that way. I don't think it's going to be home and home splits. I think you're going to see Pacers maybe get a game in the first 2. New York maybe comes back and gets one in 3 or 4. I think it's just going to be a very tightly contested series. Pretty fun series, but I think overall, New York probably just a little bit better of a team right now. Obviously, being the 2 seed, they're going to be able to pull this one out in the end, I think.
Okay. I'm going Knicks in 6.
Okay.
I think for me, I see like a 1 or 2 games where it's just a complete just torching of the Nets from Indiana, where
Mhm.
everyone's hitting their shots. They're shooting like something stupid, like 60% from downtown. I see that happening. This I think the thing for me that changes is just defensively. I think if the Knicks are able to really slow down Indiana, obviously
Yeah.
that's going to be the big pain. But if you're not going to have that guy who's like Brunson, who's consistently scoring 25, 30 a night to really keep the team in it, I just find it hard to win because you need that guy who's a hub that
Mhm.
really attracts the double, triple teams, and that you're just trying to figure it out because, like we discussed earlier, you want to put the onus on the role players to try and win these games. And just watching it against Philly, we had to rely on Josh Hart because Brunson didn't shoot well enough in those first 2 games. He wasn't efficient. Like he got 20, 25 points, but really it was the effectiveness of Josh Hart. So in this case, I think the defense not being the same physicality that they would face against Indiana, I see Brunson get into his spots a little bit more. I see him being a little bit more comfortable. So I think this one's going to go 6. But I do believe it'll be tightly contested. But I do think there's going to be some games where it just gets out of hand for
Yeah.
both sides. For both sides. But
Mhm.
that's where I'm going. But no,
I
go
think we're
ahead.
pretty close. I would say I think we're kind of in the same like understanding of or expectations for this series. Like I think New York's a better team. I think they're uh just built a little bit better defensively. I think defense wins more in the playoffs. I think they're going to be able to dictate the pace of Indiana a little bit more too. Like I said, there's going to be games where somebody gets hot. It could be, a 2-2 series going into game 5 back to New York. Maybe New York wins 5 and 6, like you said, and they win it in 6 games and whatever. But I just think Indiana, they haven't lost like a home game in 47 days. So they've been really good at
Wow.
home. They've been really good at home. The crowd has been incredible. So I think it's going to be hard to win Indiana, but I think the same thing for New York. New York, it's going to be hard for Indiana to win in New York too, just because of that environment. So it's going to be a fun series. And if the Pacers don't win this, I think that my expectations are fine with them winning one playoff round. I didn't really have high expectations for them, but I do think that if things break right for Indiana, they could win this series. I still believe in that. I just don't think that they're a title contending team. I mean, I think New York is going to give Boston a better matchup, and that is one thing that I've heard fans from Indiana say like the NBA is going to want Boston versus New York. So are they going to give the Knicks an extra whistle? I try not to buy into that, but it is something that does kind of pique my interest a little bit. We'll see how the games are officiated, but I just think Indiana is not a team that really draws a lot of fouls, like I mentioned earlier. So I think it's going to be fun, though. I really do. I think that the Knicks are a really fun team this year to watch. I've enjoyed watching them from afar. In this series, I will not be rooting for them, obviously, but I respect the heck out of them. I really do. I think that the way that Tibbs has coached his team and the way these guys buy in, like, the Villanova stuff, it's cool. It's kind of a overtalk, but at this point, happy for this team and the success they're having.
Hey, well, appreciate you, Alex, for coming through and helping me preview this game. Please let the listeners know where they can find you and if you got any material or work out that's up and coming that we should be on the lookout for.
Yeah, just follow me at Alex Golden NBA on X or Twitter, whatever you call it now. That's where most of my stuff's at. I do tweet from a Pacers perspective, so I'm going to see it through rose-colored glasses at times because I am a Pacers fan that's covering this team as well. So, but I try to be fair. I really try to be fair. So if you want to come at me in my mentions, I won't always reply to everything just because I'm not going to get into fights with anybody on social media about stuff like that. But let's have a good conversation. If you're a Knicks fan, you want to check out our YouTube page at Setting the Pace, a Pacers podcast, watch our recap shows, comment in there, let us know what you think. We'd love to interact and get your opinions on these games as well. But I think it's going to be fun, and I appreciate you, Alex, for having me on and setting this up. It was a lot of fun, and, podcast Setting the Pace, just wherever you guys get your podcasts, go and check our, perspective out on this series. That'd be a lot of fun, and I'll make sure all of our listeners can follow you because this is a great podcast as well. You've been a guest on this show before, so for our listeners that are listening on my feed, can you go ahead and plug where you guys are at for people to follow you?
Yeah, man. Look, for us, you can go over to youtube.com/KnicksFanTV. You can go to any audio listening platform, Spotify, Apple, and so forth to go check out KnicksFanTV as well. So, look, Alex, I appreciate you coming through and breaking it down with me over here. But to Knicks Nation, thank you once again for tuning for another Game of the Week preview. Make sure to hit that thumbs up button for your boys. Make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure to support our sponsor, Underdog Fantasy. Use that promo code KFTV to get up to a $100 match on your first deposit. Also, make sure to check out KnicksFanTV.com. We got a bunch of great writers over there too doing the damn thing. Also, make sure if you are not able to go to the first game at Madison Square Garden, don't worry, don't fret. We got another watch party at Sucker Punch tomorrow, okay? KFTV watch parties are still going on, so make sure to head over to Sucker Punch to go join the rest of the Orange and Blue Nation to root for the Knicks as they take on the Indiana Pacers this round. So make sure to head over there. And I cannot forget this. I got to give out a shout out to all the franchise channel members. Thank you all for tuning in as always. All right. Appreciate all of you. Shout out to Big Surge for coming through. Shout out to Muhammad Mustafa. Shout out to my guy TM, the Chief Modern Operation. All right. He said, Alex, don't worry, man. He says, with all the praise you're giving, all the New York Knicks, he may convert you yet to being a Knicks fan. So you better hold on there. Shout out to my guy Junior Caroma. Shout out to my guy John Talento as well for being in here too. All right, we got a lot of you. We got a lot of the regulars in here as well. Shout out to Johnny4481. Shout out to Two Lifted. Shout out to Nick Malta as well. Shout out to K-Dot. All right, appreciate all you guys and the rest of Knick Nation for tuning in yet again for another Game of the Week preview. You already know what to do. We got play-by-play tomorrow. We got post-game tomorrow. You already know where to be locked in and get ready. And there's also going to be pretty sure there's another Knicks Weekly happening tomorrow as well. So make sure to tap it with CP for tomorrow's show. All right, everyone, we'll catch you later. We out.